guys, welcome back to the Honestly Jess Show. I am your host, Jess, and today we have our very first podcast guest, which is so exciting. And so I will let her introduce herself in a minute, but we're going to be talking about missions. We're going to be talking about its relation to the American church. We're going to be talking about life in general and just kind of wherever the Holy Spirit leads. So yeah, stick around and we'll get going. Okay, guys, welcome back to the show. As you can see, I have a guest with me. So, Miss Guest, would you please introduce yourself to the people?
Yes, my name is Bailey. I live in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, tiny town in the mountains, and I currently manage a coffee shop, but I did used to be in full-time missions.
Heck freaking yes. Okay, so that is why we have Bailey on today. Bailey was one of my leaders while I was at my second school in London back in 2023. And so we've had a chance to catch up since we've both been back stateside. And she was like, hey, if you ever want to guest on the show, let me know. And I was like, actually, yes, please. So I sent her a list of questions and we're just going to dive right in. I printed them out. So Bailey, give us your backstory. How did you and Jesus meet and how did you get into YWAM?
Yeah, I feel like I had a pretty typical like American Christian childhood. I grew up in the South, so I always heard about Jesus. I had this little prayer I would pray before I went to bed, so classic. But I feel
Mhm.
like the defining moment of like really choosing Jesus and realizing like, oh, this is something that I need to pursue. I think I was like 10 years old. Um, I was in this small group at my church, and this woman was praying over our little group of girls, and I just started crying. And I was like,
Aw.
I did not know why I was crying. I don't remember what the prayer was about, but I
Yeah.
remember just like feeling what now I know is the Holy Spirit. So I was like,
Mm.
I think that was my first moment of really meeting Jesus and thinking, okay, I'm gonna pursue this and I'm gonna like do things for God and with God.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, but YWAM, I found out about in the same church. I think I was about 13, and one of the older girls that
Mm.
I really looked up to. Like she was the coolest. She went to YWAM. She went to Hawaii, of
Heck
course, because
yeah.
everyone goes to Hawaii.
Yeah.
um, and I knew I wanted to be in missions, and I was like, that is cool. But I didn't initially think I was going to go into YWAM. I did a few
Mhm.
things short term with some other people, with my church, with a different organization, and then randomly, like people from all areas of my life just started going into YWAM, and I was like, what really is this?
Mhm.
Um, and then God was kind of like, hey, do that. So,
Yeah. Dude, I love that. So, did you grow up then in like a faith tradition here that was more open to Holy Spirit, like openly? Because I know growing up,
yeah.
they were like, Holy Spirit. And I'm like, who is that?
Yeah, I did. I grew up in an Assemblies of God church.
Okay.
So that's like kind of Pentecostal.
Hmm.
Honestly, I don't really know that much about like what it is specifically, but there were people speaking in tongues. I remember I went to a summer camp when I was like 11 and someone was slain in the spirit. I still don't know where I stand with that, but
Yeah.
I I remember I brought a friend with me and she saw that and she didn't really go to church and I was like, "Oh
Hmm.
gosh, she does not know what just hit her."
Right. Oh, dang. Yeah, I have a friend who also grew up in Assemblies of God, and she's talked about that. Also, interestingly, like the missions aspect of like Assemblies of God as a whole, because I feel like they're definitely super missions focused, which
Yeah,
is
for sure.
definitely super cool. Oh, love that. So, second question, which is great because we were talking about Holy Spirit and your upbringing. What was like the way that you felt God communicated with you most overseas? Because when you went, and did you do your DTS in 2020 or 2021, or was it earlier than that?
I think it was 2021. Yeah.
Okay.
It was a weird situation because I applied in 2019 and then COVID happened, so I got pushed back and it was kind of like just random. So it was April of 2021. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, how do you feel like? Because I mean, I think too, Urban Key is. I feel like one of the more like if I'm gonna throw people into categories like moderate when it comes to like they're for sure operating in Holy Spirit, but it's not just like charismatic, like
Yeah.
Pentecostal, whatever. But we really talked a lot about hearing the voice of God. So, had you already experienced a lot of that before getting to YWAM? And then, like, how do you feel that God communicated with you while you were there?
For sure, hearing the voice of God was not a foreign concept to me, and I practiced that. I practiced, prayer and listening, and I could say that I heard the voice of God. But I think being at the base that we were at, it was like an everyday thing. And that really kind of
Mm,
expanded my view of, okay, God speaks not just when we're, praying before we go to bed or in a specific allotted time for prayer. Like if we
mm,
seek God, he will speak to us
yeah.
in any moment in whatever we're doing. So I think my eyes were opened up a lot to that just because I feel like made prayer just such a central thing, and
Mhm.
intercession was such a like pivotal part of really every ministry that we did.
Yeah.
Um, but I feel like as far as how I experienced God speaking to me, it was a lot through people. And I
Mm,
think that was just kind of an overflow of how much we prioritized intercession and prayer and really just listening to God. But the amount of like words and pictures and, prophetic things I received from people weekly was
yeah.
crazy and just is not something I've ever experienced really outside of the base that we were at. So,
Yeah. Yeah. 100% agree. I mean, it was all a very foreign concept to me.
mm,
Well, foreign-ish, like because I'd had other friends in YWAM, I kind of like knew about it, but the Baptist skepticism runs deep. So
mm.
there was a lot of like
I
trying to
bet
get
that was
people to
like
believe
a
that.
shell shock a little bit.
It was, which was so funny because like one of my best friends who like really kind of introduced me to YWAM, she did her DTS in Yosemite and she also grew up Southern Baptist, but like through a whole other series of things had just kind of started to lean more Pentecostal and like her faith was crazy. Still is crazy. She's one of the most like faith-filled people that I know.
Mm,
And so I sort of had an understanding. And then my mentor here, she has kind of floated both lines of like super legalistic, but also super charismatic, and came back to like a really interesting middle ground. And so it's funny because in many ways, I think God prepared me before I went
mm,
because, I think I talked about this on the first episode. I'd been out of church for a while actually before I went back to YWAM or went back to church and then went to YWAM. And this mentor was a pivotal part of that because she, more than anybody I knew, did pray and she received words and she received pictures. And a few times, like over the years of knowing her, she had given those to me.
mm.
But the level and like, yes, the intercession thing, honestly, like cherished those Wednesdays where we do intercession so much. Like
Yeah.
they were so special. And that was something that when I came back, even, um, it was strange to not have that in like my daily routine.
Yeah.
And like I tried to introduce it to my small group when I came back and love them. But they are very and we're very uncomfortable with the idea of like praying out loud. And I was like,
Mm,
man, this has become like so normal for me. But it's still, a concept that we're trying to introduce here. And not necessarily because all these people were like super embedded in Baptist theology. Like I guarantee you, because it was me too. Most of us don't know what Baptist theology really is. Save like our Connect group leader, who she actually went to Southeastern Seminary, so
mhm.
she went to a Southern Baptist seminary. She's wicked smart, and so she does know all the things. But the rest of us didn't. We just went to the church we went to because it was a church that was there.
Yeah. I
Um,
feel like that's the case for most people.
Yes, yeah. I'm like everybody's just kind of like going where they find community and whatever.
Mm,
And I don't think that's wrong. But it does present some interesting stuff when you like get down to the nitty-gritty of
mhm.
what you believe and like the voice of God thing. Um for sure. So, did you find that like when you were on outreach, did like the way the Lord spoke to you change at all? Like was it through um was it still chiefly like through people or did you find the experiences you had cuz I don't remember, did you lead any outreaches too?
I did. I led an outreach. I led a few like mini outreaches. I never led like a full DCS outreach.
Okay, yeah.
Um, but I don't know if the method changed or like the way I was receiving things really changed. But I feel like outreach is so special because it's so hard.
Yeah.
And I feel like in like your hardest situations, you either are not hearing God at all because you're not listening, or
Mm.
you're hearing God so much because it's like, okay, I have to depend on God because I have no other option.
Yes.
Um, so I think that's where like I look back at the outreaches I went on, and I was so fortunate to go on so many cool outreaches in
Hmm.
my time there.
Yeah.
But I think the deepest moments of hearing God's voice was like through the struggle, because there were some hard times.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Like what were some of those times, if you don't mind me asking? Like what were
Yeah.
like some moments that still stick out to you of like, dang, that was a time that like God marked me with.
Mhm. I remember I went on I think it was a month long outreach in Germany for my leadership school.
Yeah.
And it was beautiful. It was such an amazing experience in a culture that I had never experienced anything like, because I had been to like Central America, and Urban Key was very influenced by like Central and South American culture and
Mhm.
stuff. There was a lot of European things as well, but truly European culture I had never experienced.
Yeah.
So being in Germany and just seeing how God moved there was like
Mm.
beautiful, but also just very different. So
Yeah.
trying to like respect how people worked and approached God and just religion in general was a challenge, but also the team I was with, my best friends, like I love them so dearly, but we had
Mhm.
a lot of issues. Like not issues,
Yeah.
but there were just moments where like we would get on each other's nerves and like,
Mhm.
oh, we were so mad at each other. So I just saw a lot of like my sin struggles arising, honestly, and
Mm.
like my
Yeah.
pride coming out, and just like a lot of things that I didn't realize I was dealing with just
Mhm.
kind of all came to the forefront. And that is the moment where you either are like, okay, I'm going to handle it all on my own and like it sucks, or I'm going to go to God with this because I have no other option. So
Yeah.
there was just a lot of struggles in like communication, and a lot of my like I've dealt with anxiety and stuff just in my past, and that was coming out. And I was like, God, what the heck is
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah.
Um, but I think it was just really a result of like the stress we were under at some moments, but also like the spiritual atmosphere of
Mm.
Germany in general, but also the churches
Sure.
we were working with. I think it was really affecting us on a deeper level than we expected. So,
Yeah. Oh my gosh, for sure. And like, so that kind of takes us into the next question, because I feel like when I went overseas, whether it was conscious or not, a lot of people were like, "Oh, you're going to Europe.
mm,
Like, it's fine." And it's like, "A- actually, no, it's not." But they equate, for whatever reason, I feel like wealth and like European summer and whatever to like that not being a mission field.
hmm
So, like, what are some misconceptions that like maybe even you had going in? Because I certainly know, like, when I spent some time in France, actually before I came to London, so many misconceptions I had about faith, about the way people were operating, like churches and just cultural things kind of just got tossed to the wind, and God was like, let's start over.
hmm
Um, and like conveying those to people was difficult. But like, were there any misconceptions that you encountered either from other people or even in your own spirit that the Lord was like, hey, let's teach people a better way, or like, let me show you a better way to
mm,
deal with this too?
yeah. I mean, there was definitely a lot of like, especially from other people being in missions in Europe, I was like, oh, they don't need missionaries, especially
Yeah.
England, because England is like a hub for just Christian history and church history and
Right.
everything. So when people hear you're going to London, it's like, well, what are you going to do there? And I think like something so beautiful about London specifically is that it is such a cultural, you know, hub and just place where
Yes.
people from all over the world come. So I
Mhm.
think we had a unique experience in the way that like we saw how so many faith traditions operated, and even just different types of Christianity with like the Church of England, and
Yeah.
where our base is. Specifically, there was a lot of Jamaican influence and like just Caribbean things and Middle Eastern things. So it was like kind of an interesting experience of like, well, I'm in England, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it.
Right.
um, so I think for me that was interesting because I was like, oh, England, cool. It's somewhere I wanted to go. They're, Christian. The culture can't be that different. But then you enter
Mhm.
into a place where it's like, I didn't actually meet that many British people, especially in
Yes.
London.
For real.
Um, so I don't know if I had any misconceptions as far as like faith goes.
Mhm.
Definitely I got to see a lot of different just traditions, and like the Church of England is so different than the Assemblies of God Church or just American churches in
Yeah.
general.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I don't know if I really had anything that I received like conviction on or like, hey, you need to break out of this. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, I coming from a more charismatic background, going into the Church of England, it was
Mm.
definitely like, and also our base, just
Yeah.
I wanted to see people like just have more freedom and like
Mhm.
operate in more charismatic ways. And it's like I have seen so much fruit from doing things this way. Like you guys just
Yeah.
need to break out of your molds and like,
Yeah.
which is good in some ways, but then it's like, okay, God can move in so many different areas and traditions and ways of doing things. Like,
Yeah.
my idea of wanting people to break out of their box was really putting God in my own box.
Oof.
And
Yeah.
yeah, not believing that He could move in the silence and move in
Mhm.
the liturgy and the traditional ways of like doing things that I was so honestly against in the beginning. So I was like, oh,
Yeah.
this is so just, I don't understand. Doesn't make any sense. It's so like stuffy and what's the
Yeah.
point? But being there and serving a lot of Church of England churches, you see so
Mhm.
much beauty in that when people are intentional and know why they believe what they believe and know why they're doing what they're doing. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
God can move through you even if you're not jumping around in worship and like waving your hands in the air and everything.
Yeah. No, it's so true. Like that was one piece too for myself that like I'd always loved getting to visit like cathedrals and other things like that, but I think I also had such a like big misconception of like the Catholic Church and then even more Orthodox Protestant churches that I couldn't reconcile in my mind that like
Mhm.
no, they're also like believers here too. In kind of the same vein of like not even for us, even though the church that I grew up in might be slightly more Holy Spirit filled than most Southern Baptist churches.
Mhm.
Like going through the liturgy of like sitting down and standing up, like offering peace to people and um just like having really solemn moments of prayer and very calm worship and things like that. I was like, dang, this is so interesting, but it caused me to think. And I realized that that was one of the like key parts of my own faith that sounds terrible to admit, but I hadn't really done a lot of was just like actually thinking and processing like what is it that I believe?
Yeah.
And genuinely that's also been the biggest thing since I've been back home, even though it's been almost it'll be 2 years in September. Like still like it's taken me what where I guess we're like at a year and a half now to really start to process like okay, there was a lot that I learned about the church and unlearned about the church while I was over there.
Mhm.
And I remember talking with my boss at the bakery where I used to work many years ago. He and his wife, super spirit filled, love them to death. They're just a hoot and a half. And they're running around Europe right now, which is crazy because that man is the most homebody that I know. Like, he don't ever want to go anywhere. But he told me when I came back and was sharing with him, he was like, Jess, you went for a reason, even if you don't want to be home.
Mm.
I was like, whoa, okay. So maybe we just learned things to like come back and share them with other people. And that's
Yeah.
like, that's what it is. So, yeah, that's so good. So before I get to, let's see, the next question, we're talking about the American church. Is there anything that like you encountered coming back home that you weren't prepared for, like leaving life on the field?
Just like pertaining to the church or like just in general?
Just in general, like because I feel like especially in a place like where the base is in London, the routine of everything like becomes so
Mhm.
ingrained in you, and jumping from that level of community to coming back home in any capacity, like even living with my family, so I still have some like inherent community. It was a weird jump to make, and I was only gone 9 months.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, so much of it took adjustment and like a lot of pain and a lot of like really fighting with God of like, okay, I know I made this choice and I consciously made this choice,
Mm-hmm.
but I thought I was going to be there for so much longer than I was. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, God, what are you doing? And especially the season that I came back into,
Hmm.
I there was a good 6 months where I was just forced to exist. And I think like that sounds so weird, but God had me in a season where it was like he was teaching me how to be and not how
Hmm.
to do. And I
Yeah.
think as a missionary, just full time where that's your day to day, a lot of
Hmm.
who you are is what you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think that's like fully the flat out truth in the case of like, oh, you're a missionary, you're that's what who you
Yeah.
are, that's what you're doing, it's who you are. That shouldn't be the case, but sometimes it
Yeah.
turns into that.
Hmm.
And I think when I came home, I was my driving force was okay. I have to get money because I am not raising support anymore.
Yeah.
I need a real job. I have to do something at least so I can save up, so I can, move out of my parents' house, so I can get on with life.
Yep.
And none of that was I wasn't seeking God in any of that. It was doing
Mm.
things in the way that I thought I should and the way that society tells us,
Yeah.
you do. You go get a job, you make money, you move on with your life. And it was so interesting how God kept me in this place of stillness because
Mm.
every job I tried to get, I wouldn't hear back from the interviews. I couldn't do anything. The job I did get, I hated it and I quit it after a month and it was just terrible. And anything I tried to do to just make money for the sake of making money like failed me.
Mm.
Um,
Hmm.
and it came to a point where literally God spoke to me like it's not about what you're doing, it's about just being, just existing, just
Wow.
leaning on me and surrendering yourself to me. And if that means you don't make money or you don't have a job title or, you know, you're racking your brain on, oh, what do I do? Like, if you are leaning on me, like, that's what I want you to do in the season.
Mm.
And it was tough. And especially just coming out of missions where you have purpose
Yeah.
and you have a routine, and especially as somebody in YWAM, you have a daily like 9 a.m. we're doing this, 10 a.m. we're doing
Mhm.
this. And that's just not life a lot of the
Yeah.
times. Um, so coming out of that was really difficult.
Yeah.
But I think another thing that really was challenging that I think I expected to happen, but it still just kind of is shocking when you actually have to live it, is it's not that people don't care, but
Yeah.
life goes on for other people, when you're away from them.
Mhm.
So when you come back, things have changed, and it's not that people don't care about what you did, but
Yeah.
they're probably not going to be eagerly saying, tell me every story, every experience,
Right.
every testimony, tell me all of it. Like, I don't
Mhm.
think I ever really, unless people, brought up something that reminded me of a memory, people
Mhm.
never really asked about my experience.
Yeah.
And that took a lot of like humility of,
Mm.
okay, was I doing this for God or was I doing this to have a cool story?
Yeah.
Um, but I think that was one of the big things that I had to get used to was like,
Mhm.
people don't really care.
It's so
In the
true.
nicest way.
No, for real. And like it's so interesting because I experienced that. So I had a weird break in my like schools when I was over there because I probably could have stayed in the UK like between my school at Radiant and my school at Urban Key, but I chose not to, and so I ended up coming home for like a week before I started the internship at Urban Key. And
Mhm.
when I came back to visit like my family and go to like our home church at the time, and like for reference, my home church also did not send me as a missionary,
Mm,
um, which was fine. I didn't expect them to. Um, but I had such a prideful attitude. It was so bad. Like I just look back and I go,
yeah.
I can't believe God didn't just like smite me out of existence right there. Like to have the attitude I did walking in there to his house. No. Because I kind of came in like people had known that I had gone, but it had also started to become more normal that more of our friends were going and doing things overseas. They were and have started to become more of a sending church and have a lot more like the missions isn't as hard to find.
Mm,
Um, and so I was like, dang, no one is asking. Or people are like just kind of half assed asking, honestly. And that was hard too, because I was like, dang, I've actually seen a lot of life change and like
yeah.
also kind of experienced a lot of life change. What's going on? And then when I went back, went through the internship at Urban Key and kind of like had to wrestle with the fact that I felt like the Lord was going to ask me to come home. um,
Mm,
I felt like I didn't want to come home because I didn't have enough, like I hadn't done enough.
mm,
And like my stories weren't big enough yet because I didn't really see any like crazy life change or like what I felt like was a big enough story to share. And I
mm,
actually think that that was the point and that was the big story is that kind of like what you were talking about with the way God operates in the churches, like in the Anglican church in England. It's that kind of stillness and the quietness that he's like, I'm actually still here. I'm actually
mm,
still moving. And like that's it. So I remember we were in Bournemouth for summer of missions, and I just had this sense where I was like, you know what? I need to tell my parents if they can find me a plane ticket home after they come visit. Like I'll come home. Because I was running out of money. I had run up a credit
yeah.
card, and I was like, I can't afford to stay here because I hadn't raised enough support. Um, that's a weird thing about. I don't think it's all Southern Baptists, but like we're still learning how to support missionaries more because
Yeah.
we kind
I
of
mean, I
just
think
like
that's honestly just a lot of the
everybody.
American church and a lot
Yeah.
of people in general.
Yeah, it's that needing data. Um but yeah, dude, that's so real. So thank you for sharing
Mm,
because I can feel that hurt in a very different
yeah.
way. But the struggle of just having to accept like well, actually the job thing I currently feel at the moment. Um And then the answer that God gave you, I'm like, yeah, I kind of got that a few weeks ago as well. And I'm like,
Mm,
I don't like that. Um,
yeah.
but like that whole, just the whole experience, yes. Oh my gosh. Um, so that kind of leads us into this next question. Like, how has your relationship with the American church changed since your time on the field and coming home? Slash, because I have to be careful to not be uber judgmental towards the American
Mm,
church because I'm also part of it. Um, but I think growing up in like a pretty significant mega church in the Southern Baptist denomination has also affected how I see like church in general. Um, so like how has your relationship with the American church and how we do things here kind of changed since being on the field?
yeah, it's been honestly such an interesting process, like thinking back. But I think similarly to you, before I went into missions, I did not go to church. I
Mm-hmm.
grew up in a church, but I think I stopped going routinely to a church that like I was a part of when I was 16.
Yeah.
I kind of was just tired of the facade and a lot of the things that have been brought up of just where we're lacking.
Yeah.
Me and my parents, we really began to see that in the church that we were a part of and
Mm.
just never really found anywhere. Like we jumped around, but we were like, okay, we were just like done with dealing with the crap, you know? And
Yep.
I think of course, I think it's necessary to have grace and to realize that the church is made up of broken people, so you're not going to find a perfect place.
Sure.
and the importance of just going to church for the sake of going, because God tells us, that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, I hadn't gone to a church in years leading up to going into full-time missions. And
Mm.
I had honestly such a beautiful experience of God changing my heart towards the church through
Mm.
the Anglican church.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot of the things I've touched on already, but I was just so against the tradition and like the
Hmm.
stuffiness, and I just wanted to see people alive and like really experiencing God the way that I had experienced Him.
Yeah.
And like that freedom that comes with just like, letting go. Um, but I remember on my DTS outreach, we were serving a church in Birmingham, England,
Mm.
and they were such a just unified little church that just loved each other and showed up for each other and
Mhm.
were just such a beautiful picture of what I think the church is supposed to be. And
Yeah.
I remember just going through this process and being like, oh my gosh, I hated this for so long. And I built up so much resentment to it. But
Yeah.
seeing these people just love each other and,
Mm.
be broken together and acknowledge,
Yeah.
hey, we're not perfect, it just like brought so much healing to that area of my life.
Mhm.
So having that as like a very early experience in my YWAM journey, the years um, following that, I got to experience so many more types of churches, so many more like iterations of the Anglican Church, I guess. I don't really know all
Yeah.
of like the denominations and stuff over there still,
Mhm. Yeah.
but just different expressions. That's what I'm thinking of. We went to
Yeah.
like a very almost Orthodox Anglican church at one point that we were serving on an outreach. And like I said earlier, just to see how the Holy Spirit was moving in that, like, just gave
Mhm.
me such an appreciation for the church. So I knew coming back, I needed to really connect with something in the States. And that was such a struggle. I was comparing
Mhm.
it to what I experienced and
Yep.
honestly, like doing a little bit of the reverse of like, oh, you guys need to be more structured.
Yeah.
um, and just really like what you were saying, like I was just dealing with being so judgmental and so
Mm.
nitpicky. I think I've dealt with that my whole life, but
Mm.
I never found anything in that period where I was living at home with my family.
Yeah.
But then recently in the past few months, I have found a place that is also a very beautiful picture of community. And like they've gone through a
Mm.
lot of things as a body and just seeing them again, like be broken together and just kind of show up and say, okay, we're a family and we might not agree on everything, but we can still gather.
Yeah.
Um, I think that is just something that's so beautiful that I gleaned from my time in missions and something that I always want to seek in, whatever church I go to.
Yeah.
That was such a
Uh,
roundabout answer. I don't know if that
no, I love it. I love it. Listen, I talk in circles all the time. No, I genuinely yes, because that's where I think a lot of people who come out of missions, obviously neither one of us can speak for most people, but um the consensus I've heard is like what you and I have both said, is that something on our time, like during our time on the field, affected us and how we saw church coming back. And so there's like a different type of fight, especially yeah, like if we've been tired of the church before we leave and then we go experience something totally different and come back and it's like, well, America's just still being America. And it's like, which is fine. Because I was even talking about this with someone in a voice note earlier. Like we've been going back and forth because we tried to do a house church. And then I
Mm,
realized like that was not gonna like not just like work as in I need church to work for me, but like with my current schedule, like I couldn't even hardly glean anything from that. And so the Lord opened up a different door for a church that meets on Thursday nights. And I was like, you know what?
mm,
I like really enjoy their teaching. It's theologically sound. Like I don't know if I agree with them on everything, but like at this point, it's like, you know what? They've been so kind and so welcoming, and it's just been like a breath of fresh air in like so far as church goes. And so this friend actually, her and her family ended up going to the same church, but on Sunday mornings now.
Mm,
Um, and so seeing the Lord do that, and I think it's weird too, especially like where I live, like the church that I grew up in is like the main church. So everyone, they're like, oh, you go to X church? And it's like, yeah. And then like, okay, well, which campus? Because there are like 8 campuses.
mm.
And so a lot of times you see people who have left that church in and around these other little churches. And so we're kind of like a collective of like, oh, like why'd you leave? And not necessarily that it's bad. Um, but I think that we all have like all started to crave the smallness that I think is
Mm,
what I learned the most while I was overseas is just that the intentionality of community trumps most things, even when it comes to like being in a mega church. And like the pastor of that church has even said this, is that the reason they try and promote small groups or connect groups or whatever you want to call them, like, is so that if you're sitting in a mega church, you actually can find your church in this group of other people. Because like we're
yeah.
not daily living life with the worship team and like the people on staff and whoever, and we shouldn't be necessarily. Um, but yeah, there's just so many weeds, so many weeds.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I think it's also interesting, like coming from a situation like a YWAM base where it's church every day.
mm-hmm.
And you go back and it's like, okay, church is once a week on Sunday. It's
Yep.
like, but I don't want that. Like I wanna be there every day and do life with you and know your deepest, darkest secrets. And it's
Right.
like that's just not how things work.
No,
So like
no.
having grace and like realizing that, again, that's a box that I'm putting around
Mm-hmm.
something and like yeah, but it is hard because there's such sweetness in like doing life every day with your church,
Mm-hmm.
um, that you don't get, when it's just that weekly routine.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. That's definitely something that um I wonder if there's a way to like, and maybe somebody's already done it, but like convey that with people coming off the field, and even going on to the field of like the way you see church is more than likely about to change, and then as people come off the field,
Mm,
like the way you see church is also more than likely about to change, because it's also so different, like even continent to continent of like the influences of how certain cultures that have been around so much longer than American culture are affecting people there. And so that's been interesting to kind of talk about because I have a friend who she is going to be a missionary in West Africa and she's visited several times. She's a nurse. So she has like a dual purpose going,
mm,
because she can actually use her technical skills. But like the point of going is to build a community. There are already a handful of believers in this place and just continue to foster the relationship with the church that's slowly growing, in this place where there's a lot of civil war.
mm,
And um, she's had a really interesting experience because she's started her journey in France, actually, because she needed to learn French. It's the easiest language to pick up for this particular country in West Africa. And we met up one time because she was like, West Africa doesn't scare me. France, I'm terrified. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, well, I can definitely help you with France. I certainly couldn't help you with West Africa.
yeah.
But it was so funny and like so sweet and tender too, though, because she's like, I know that this is going to be like a totally different culture shock, not just once she gets there as an American, but even transitioning out of the French culture and into this new one. And
Mhm,
so we had a lot of discussions, kind of like what we've talked about earlier, even of like, what's the message that we convey to her supporters of like, hey, here's our ultimate goal. This is just a stepping stone to get there. So, like, we can't dismiss the fact that, like, yes, she might be just outside of Paris, France right now. But that, that doesn't negate any of what God's called her to do, nor does it elevate it in any way. It's like,
yeah.
no, it's just a part of the journey to get to where she's going. Um, and so she had a really interesting time, like talking to her church about it, but she was really well received, which was encouraging. So, which I love. But that kind of takes us into this last doozy of a question. So if you were mediating between missionaries and churches, and the reason, let me explain why I want to ask this question to the people, since I've already talked about it. The reason I want to ask this question is because I think the relationship between American churches specifically and people on the field, even though there are great organizations like the Southern Baptists have the International Mission Board and the North American Mission Board, both of those are, yeah, I think both of those are based out of North Carolina, actually.
Mhm.
Because oddly enough, we're the most evangelical state in the country.
I did
Um,
not know that. Whoa.
Unless the statistics have changed, it's because we have so many Southern Baptist like groups here,
Yeah.
actually, which is hilarious. But the relationship a lot of times between people on the field and people at home does get skewed through this lens of like, well, how many people have come to Christ? What's
Mm,
been done? Like all that sort of stuff that goes back to what Bailey mentioned about purpose. And like one of the things that happens when you're a missionary is like you have a very specific purpose, you have something that you're trying to do. And even if missionaries aren't necessarily looking for data, a lot of times churches are because that's how they convey things to people, blah, blah, blah. So
mm.
the question, if you were mediating between missionaries and churches, what is one thing you would want them to understand about the other side? So, speaking for both, that you feel has been overlooked in the conversations around Matthew 28:18 through 20, which is the passage that says, Go and make disciples.
This is a crazy question, and it's so good, and I think it's so necessary to think about and talk about. Um, but I think we've touched on this a lot, but I think that the church, and I don't want to say this for every church because again, there are so many different ways of understanding things and types of tradition and everything, and some churches really prioritize missions and some don't, and
Yeah.
all that stuff. But I think that it's important to remember that missions is not always going to look like intense suffering and
Mm.
being in the, like, what am I trying to say? Like, for instance, being in Europe, where I mean, there are definitely parts of Europe that are very poor and very, akin to the third world conditions,
Sure.
that we would imagine would be in places like Africa and stuff like that. The classic mindset
Yeah.
of Americans thinking about missionaries.
Yep.
But I think we need to remember that missions and making disciples is a call to everyone. If you are a Christian, you are called to make disciples.
Mm-hmm.
And something so interesting that my friend was actually talking to me about the other day was that when you make disciples and they make disciples and they make disciples, that's reaching the nations. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not always our responsibility to, I have to go to 7 different countries and convert
Right.
40 different people in every country to reach the nations.
Yeah.
But also, if you are called to the nations in a literal sense of going somewhere else, it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean that, you're losing all of your material items and you have no money. And
Right.
sometimes it does. And sometimes God does call you into situations like that. But if missions and disciple making is a call to everyone, then it's necessary in every atmosphere, in every
Yeah.
condition, in every, you know, um, form of society and, stuff like that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's going to be different and it's probably not going to look like your expectation of, a missionary going to the poorest country.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think on the flip side, as far as like missionaries and churches, and what I think missionaries need to remember about churches is that um, it's hard to, like, let me process this for a second.
Yeah. Yeah. Take your time.
um, I think when you're on this side of things, unless you've really experienced missions, it's hard to conceptualize what you're actually doing.
Mm,
And, when we do look at it from this lens of, oh, they're out saving people and working with the poorest of the poor and the widows and the orphans, if
mm-hmm.
you're not hearing those crazy stories, it's easy to be like, okay, what are they actually doing? So I think it is
Yeah.
important, even though that is frustrating when people have that mindset, it's important to have grace
Yeah.
because you truly don't know what it's like until you do it.
Yeah.
As far as full-time vocational missions,
Yes.
it is just such a different rhythm. You're literally depending on other people for your money, and most of the
Mm-hmm.
times.
Yeah.
And it's just such a different struggle and such a different process of just doing things. So if you get people who are confused and don't really know why they should be supporting you, you know, have grace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that summarizes it beautifully. On all sides, that answers that phenomenally. Um, I feel like I can't add anything, which is good because I'd probably be here for like another hour trying to add something. Um, so thank you, Bailey, so freaking much for this conversation.
Of
Um,
course.
and I would love to get your honest take on anything, not just stuff we've talked about. Um, give us something that you're like, honestly, Jess, here's my thing about whatever. It can be something we talked about or something that you've just been randomly mulling over in
Oh,
your life, pop culture, whatever.
oh, shoot. I was prepared for this, but I didn't prepare myself for it.
Yeah.
So, I need to think. Um, oh gosh. Um, this is so silly and has
Go for it.
nothing to do with what we're talking about, but
I
this is
love
the
it.
one
Go
thing
for it.
that went into my mind. Um, and if this is not the vibe of what you want, I can think of something else.
No, girl.
But honestly, I think that um super thick toilet paper is overrated.
I freaking love that.
I we
Freaking.
have some thick stuff at my work right now and I kind of
Uh-huh.
hate it.
Nah, this is so true. Anything beyond like 2 ply, I'm kind of like,
Yeah.
we can calm down.
Yeah.
Like the Charmin, whatever the commercials
The
with the
ultra
bears,
strong? Yeah, too
too
much.
strong. Actually, no, I 100% agree.
Oh my gosh.
Dude, that's freaking incredible. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'm so appreciative of you. And y'all, if you love this conversation, please let me know. If you're watching on YouTube, like the video. If you're listening on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, you can leave a comment or leave a review. As always, anything relevant will be in the show notes. And until next time, y'all be good.